Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. Loads of love to each and every one of you. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and all the better for spending some quality time with you, listening to a fabulous story. But before we get started, don't forget to get that quintessential perfect drink, whether it's a refreshing glass of white wine or whatever it is that you enjoy, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it must have been a Saturday night in the early spring of 1994, when I was about 17 years old at the time. I was lying fast asleep in my cosy bed in my grandmother's home on the top floor of her double-story farmhouse in Washington State. I suddenly opened my eyes and smiled happily to myself as I could hear the calming sound of heavy rain pelting down on the roof. I loved listening to the rain, as I found the sound to be soothing and relaxing. It began beating down ever harder and harder with a forceful intensity, and in the distance the rumblings of thunder could be heard coming from miles away. It certainly looked like a storm was brewing. My grandmother always used to say that when you heard the faint, distant rumblings of thunder, that Mother Earth was having a rather bad day and was a little grumpy and cantankerous. I think I must have fallen asleep again, but I was suddenly awoken to the violent, frantic banging sounds of someone at the front door at a very ungodly hour of the night. It was still raining heavily, so maybe someone was caught out in the thick of the torrential rainstorm. I quickly put on my nightgown and slippers, wondering who would be calling us so late in the night. Why would anyone pound the door so loudly, which in my opinion was brazenly rude and the height of extremely bad manners? We did live in a remote part of Washington, and visitors weren't very common for us. I began racing down the staircase while my grandmother was at the door and had switched the hall light on and was peering through the peephole, and then she removed the chain from its lock. At this stage, the banging on the door had increased in intensity, and I began to feel alarmed, but nothing ever scared my grandmother, who had the extraordinary ability to calm down the most belligerent, unruly of people. My grandmother, a silvery-haired woman, rather elegant in her late 70s, with discerning dark eyes and very pale, crepey skin, opened the door, and a man bolted into our entrance hall, carrying a heavy metal pole in his hands and waving it around precariously in a threatening manner, like someone who'd broken into a bank and was holding everyone hostage with a deadly weapon. "Where is your husband?" demanded the man, looking at my grandmother with a large, unfriendly scowl on his face. "My husband is dead," said my grandmother. "Who else is here?" he asked. My grandmother pointed to me, standing there on the staircase. "That's my granddaughter, Posy. She's staying with me indefinitely, as her mother has to take care of her husband's sister, who's dying of pancreatic cancer." "Have I told you all you need to know?" said my grandmother, eyeing the man with her sharp, beady eyes that studied him like an eagle. The man looked heartily relieved, and I could see the contours of his face visibly relax. "So it's just the two of you alone in this remote farmhouse, then, is it?" "That's right," said my grandmother. "Now, would you mind your manners awfully," said my grandmother, reaching out for the man's metal pole and retrieving it from his hands. And to my absolute amazement, he let go of it, and my grandmother took it from him. Oh dear, she tutted. "No guest in my house should be waving around deadly weapons like this, nor bringing into the house pools of water. Come in," she said to the man, who followed her like an obedient dog. I don't know what it was about my grandmother's calm demeanour and sang-froid composure, but it served to pacify and soften this man's abrasive toughness, seemingly disabling him from becoming violent towards us. My grandmother escorted the roughneck into the kitchen, while she went and got him some of my grandfather's old clothes for him to wear, which he had not had a chance to throw away, as he'd only died about a month earlier from a sudden, very unexpected heart attack that had brought much heartbreak to our family, as my grandfather was sorely missed. This ruffian was in his early 30s and unhesitantly stripped off naked in front of us in the kitchen without any embarrassment. He was neither bashful, inhibited, diffident, reticent, or even remotely self-conscious. I noticed his rock-hard tanned body was lean, lank, and ripped, with well-developed taut vertical abdominal muscles that were very pronounced as they bulged beneath the skin to form the quintessential six-pack, as though he spent hours a day working in the gym. I noticed his sculptured torso, powerful robust back, and bulking bicep muscles were covered in some badass inky blue tattoos that looked to me like menacing snakes, dragons, and spiders, and I noticed he had some swastikas tattooed to his back that really gave me the shivers. Was this man a secret hero worshipper of Hitler, the unscrupulous tyrant responsible for the death of millions of Jewish people? The very thought made me shudder in disgust. How could I like anybody who had swastikas all over them? I noticed his head was completely shaven like a skinhead, and his face was round and boyish, with very large hazel eyes. I guess he could have been attractive if he didn't have such a cocky, arrogant attitude and a very unsavoury demeanour. I sensed in my gut that he was not a good person, and that he had nefarious intent. But who was he, I wondered, and why had he come knocking at our door in the middle of the night? It never occurred to me that he was actually removing striped prison garments. As they were so sopping wet, it was hard to distinguish what he was actually wearing. I guess he surreptitiously threw them away in my grandmother's bin, so that we were none the wiser. Little did we know that he was an escaped convict who had been charged with the heinous and savage brutal murder of an entire family, and at the time we did not know that the police in Washington were searching for him everywhere. If my grandmother had any idea we were entertaining a heinous, duplicitous, contemptible predator, she never let on, but acted towards this man as she would with any guest in our home, with a warmth and kindness of note, treating him in a nurturing, motherly fashion which disarmed him and suppressed his desire to harm us. "Where is your television?" he demanded in a vicious tone. "Would you mind your manners?" my grandmother snapped. "No one talks in raised tones in this house. If you must know, we don't have a television." "Why not?" asked the man, looking befuddled. "Does not everybody have a television?" "Not us," said my grandmother. "I don't believe in filling my mind with all the trash they have on television these days." "Fair enough," said the man, who began to rub his stomach. "I'm hungry," he said. "Have you got something for me to eat?" "Why did you not say so?" said my grandmother. "I'll go and make you up a bed in the spare room, and Posy here will make you something to eat." "Thanks, ma'am. I appreciate it." My grandmother gave him a wink. "Oh, that's so much better. I'll make a gentleman out of you yet," she teased. "Good manners never ever hurt anyone." It must have been 2 o'clock in the morning when I found myself cooking the stranger sausage, bacon and eggs over the gas hob in the kitchen, which he bolted down like a hungry, ravenous, half-starved dog, and he wasn't afraid to ask for seconds either, after which he demolished a huge bowl of my grandmother's apple crumb cake with custard and licked the bottom of the bowl clean with his tongue. "Is your grandmother always like that?" he asked me curiously. "What do you mean, always like that?" I asked. "Well, so motherly, so tender. She reminds me of my own grandma. She was a good woman, my grandma. I miss her." "What's your name?" I asked. "Lucas," he said. Once the man had finished eating, his personality became more demanding, onerous, and a tad aggressive towards me. "Where's your camping gear?" he asked me suddenly, with an urgency in his voice. "It's in my grandfather's cupboard," I said. "What do you need it for?" "Shut your face, little girl," he snapped. "Where did you say it was?" I watched in horror as the man loaded up my grandfather's backpack with sleeping bags and tents. "Are you running away from something?" I asked him. "What did I say?" said the man, raising his voice. "Shut your face, girl. None of this is any of your business. Get it?" I nodded. "Is everything all right in here?" said my grandmother, entering the room. "Oh, I see you've helped yourself to my deceased husband's stuff. You can have anything you want," she said. "I was going to donate it to charity anyway, so feel free to help yourself to anything you like." "I'm done," said the man. "Thank you for your kind hospitality, man, and the very good food." And to my amazement, he planted a kiss on my grandmother's lower cheek that even surprised her. We watched him hurriedly run out of our front door, leaving our premises as quickly as he could, running through our flowery meadow, past 3 of our grazing cows, towards the wood green on our premises, which I thought was decidedly odd. Why was he not heading towards the main road, on the opposite side that led to the town? Perhaps he was going to the road that was on the edge of the woods, and taking a shortcut through there, I thought. Yes, that would also make sense. "There's something not right about that man," I said to my grandmother. "He's sly, shifty and dodgy looking. I think he's running away from something. He's acting very suspiciously." "My thoughts exactly," said my grandmother. "Well, if you thought he was so dodgy, why were you so nice to him?" I asked her in surprise. "When you're kind to the likes of someone like him, it really disorientates them. I imagine he was expecting us to be fearful, and then it would have been easy for him to unleash his wrath upon us and become hot-headed, belligerent and intemperate. Instead, we were kind to him, which in my opinion makes him less inclined to incite violence. But in my experience, it's best not to get involved, as things can turn very ugly when you encounter unhinged people like himself. So let's just pretend we never saw him, shall we? And move on from here." And that's exactly what we did. We were blindly oblivious of the pandemonium going on in Seattle in the search for this murderous criminal that we had unknowingly entertained so graciously in our home. If my grandmother had considered phoning the police, she decided firmly against it, preferring to let sleeping dogs lie and to leave feathers unruffled. My grandmother lived on a self-sufficient plot of land and had a very large vegetable yard where she grew her own vegetables and canned everything from salsa, preserves, fruit, pizza sauces, tomato, beans, corn, and the list goes on and on. She would dehydrate apples, peppers, chilies, and onions, and I promise you, her pantry would have been every prepper's dream, for she rarely ever needed to go to town, as she was almost entirely self-sufficient, with 2 big freezers literally overflowing with meat. I loved helping my grandmother on her farm, collecting eggs from the free-range chickens every morning, milking our dairy cow Matilda, and digging up potatoes and foraging for wild berries. One day, about 2 weeks after that bizarre encounter with the roughneck, I happened to be foraging for berries when I saw a couple of men's socks dangling on the hedgerow, almost as if they'd been put there deliberately to dry off, which rarely got my attention. I wondered if someone was camping out in our woods, as it had happened once before in the past. I stopped picking berries and cautiously ventured into the wood green. It was an exquisitely beautiful day, and the warm summer's sun filtered through the branches of the tall Douglas firs, the ponderosa pines and spruce trees, and there was a gentle breeze blowing, and its cool air swept through the woods, causing the trees to almost appear to dance. I could smell the refreshing woody scent of pine that permeated the air with its uplifting citrusy notes. The rocky terrain was teeming with an abundance of frilly ferns and sculptural-looking rocks that were resplendently swathed in rich green velvety-looking moss. I climbed up the precipitous, steep, rugged embankment that was heavily etched with jutting rocks, and believe me, it was very hard going, and I was getting out of breath on such a steep incline. Finally it levelled out, and the rugged forest floor sprawled out into a sizable flattened area where walking became far more pleasurable and a lot less taxing. I could hear the gurgling sounds of the charming little creek that my grandfather had loved so much when he was alive. I hadn't been up here for quite a while, and was reminded how beautiful it was, and I stood for a moment staring at the water as it meandered through the valley, while I listened to the pretty tweets and warbles of the uplifting bird-song. For a moment I was lost in a train of my thoughts, as my mind was resplendently swathed in a deep meditative state that this reverent, peaceful sanctuary evoked within me. In a trice I snapped out of my daydreaming as I detected the smell of smoke, and realised that something was definitely burning. And so I trailed the source of the smell, and stealthily I sneaked up behind a tree and saw a man sitting around a fire pit, and realised with astonishment that it was Lucas, and he was cooking something on his grill. I could see my grandfather's hunting rifle lying precariously beside the tent, and wondered how he'd managed to leave our home with a powerful, deadly weapon, as my grandmother would never have handed a rifle over to a complete stranger, and we were none the wiser about it being missing. I imagine when Lucas was on our property, he must have surreptitiously pinched a rifle from my grandfather's cabinet when we weren't looking, and hidden it outside the window very discreetly, only to come back later to retrieve it, which was a very sneaky, duplicitous and guileful thing for him to do. It was clear to me that he'd been hiding out here on my grandmother's land, and I sensed he must be in trouble with the law. Unfortunately, I must have made some kind of a noise because I cracked some pieces of timber beneath my feet, and a vigilant, guarded Lucas looked up like a German shepherd on guard duty. I knew he'd sensed my presence, as the heedful expression on his face became very alert, circumspect and wary, and he was clutching my father's rifle very tightly like a soldier on duty, and I could see his eyes and ears were pinned up for any more signs of movement. So I knew I couldn't afford to move even so much as a twig, or I would definitely get caught. "Who's there?" he shouted. "I know someone's there. I heard you." And there was silence. Lucas raised himself off the ground and began searching around the area frantically for any signs of movement. But I held my breath and attempted to remain quiet and still, hoping with all my heart not to be seen, and trying my level best to slow down my own heavy breathing, while my thundering heart seemed so loud that I was terrified it would be heard by Lucas. I tried to backtrack on my footsteps, and then I heard Lucas's voice. "Not so fast, young lady," he said, pointing the rifle at me. "Go and sit by the fire pit over there," he demanded. I was trembling in terror. I couldn't believe that Lucas had uncovered my hiding spot. Now I really was in trouble. I could see his expression going dark, and he looked exceedingly annoyed. "What are you doing here, poking your nose around the place?" he demanded. "I smelt smoke, and just came to investigate where it came from," I said. "Why are you camped out here anyway?" I asked, choosing to adopt my grandmother's attitude of remaining calm and indifferent so as not to stir up any anger. "None of your business, girl. You have a mouth on you," he said, waving his rifle around precariously. "Please put that dangerous weapon down," I said. "If it makes you feel any better, I won't tell anybody you're camped out on our land, but please let me go back now. I need to get back to the farmhouse. My grandmother will be worried about me." "You think I'm going to let you go now that you've seen me?" he said. "I know exactly what you'll do. You'll go home and call the police." "I'm not going to call the police," I insisted. "Do you know we sensed you up to no good when you bounded in on us unexpectedly last time? But did we call the police? No, we didn't. But on reflection, we possibly should have done." Lucas looked heartily relieved, but appeared as if he was struggling to make up his mind and wrestling with whether he should let me go or not. Finally, he shook his head. "Sorry, I can't take the risk to send you back," he said. "I can't let you go. I've got way too much to lose, and I'm not about to trust anyone based on futile promises from you." "Are you kidding?" I said. "If you don't let me go, I guarantee there'll be police teeming over the land searching for me, and then you really will draw attention to your presence here, and they'll find you and arrest you. Is that what you want? And then what about my grandmother? She'll be beside herself with worry if I don't make it back to the farmhouse, and the first people she's going to contact is the police." "Well, then I'll have to kill you," said Lucas, in such a nonchalant, dispassionate, blasé way, as if he was just talking about the weather. "What did you say?" I gasped. "You heard," he said. "Well, if you kill me, there'll be more police buzzing around here than bees around a honeypot. Is that what you want? The whole place will be cordoned off with crime scene tape. Your very little nice hideout here in the woods will be swooning with investigators and police dogs. Surely you don't want that." Lucas scratched his head thoughtfully and spoke out his thoughts aloud, scaring me half to death in the process. "Well, I could throw you down the embankment and whack your head with a rock. Yeah, your body would be found in a crumpled heap at the bottom of the ridge. Your death will be registered as an accident. You slipped and fell to your death. That would never attract a police presence around here. Accidental deaths happen all the time. What are you so afraid of? I piped. Why do you want to kill me so badly? What on earth have you done that is so dreadful that you're terrified of the police finding you? I paused for a moment. Of course, you've killed before, haven't you? I said, looking directly at Lucas. That's it, isn't it? Oh my God, it's true. You're wanted for murder. I've killed 4 people, said Lucas, remaining completely indifferent and as cool as a cucumber. Killing you won't be difficult either, although it's your old lady I really don't want to hurt. She's just like my grandmother. I like her a lot. Still, it can't be helped. Well, if you really want to avoid hurting my grandmother, then just let me go, please, I begged. For a long time, Lucas and I were going around in circles, discussing what he was going to do with me. But it seemed like my calm, passive and mellow approach and direct manner in which I spoke to him had suppressed and appeased his desire to act out on his intentions to kill me. I think having been camped out in the woods for over 2 weeks had deprived him of human companionship, so much so that loneliness had set in, like an oppressive, heavy, dark cloud. I believe that there was a small part of him that was secretly enjoying just talking out his plans to me and communicating with someone for a change. You may wonder why I didn't just take my chances and run away, but I absolutely knew such efforts would be inefficacious and unavailing, because I didn't doubt for a single second that if push came to shove, and if Lucas had to kill me, he would most certainly have done so. I was trying to develop some kind of relationship and rapport with him to use as an emotional attachment to my advantage, making it increasingly hard for him to kill me. I knew my grandmother would be wondering where I was by now, as it had been over an hour that I'd spent with Lucas, and she'd be growing increasingly concerned about my long absence from the farmhouse. All of a sudden I noticed a tree swaying unnaturally, as if something big was deliberately pushing it backwards and forwards, and that was when I saw what I can only describe as a very large cone-shaped head peeking at me from behind the tree. And the expression in this incongruous creature's eyes was intelligent, almost as if it was checking in on me to see if I was all right. What was this strange thing, I wondered? Moments later, an avalanche of stones were being flung at Lucas, and I could hear him say, "What the heck?" And forgetting me for a second with his rifle, he began looking for the perpetrator of the stones that continued to be hurled at him, some so potentially large that they could have almost killed him. I could hear Lucas firing shots and shouting some cursory words and slang that I would sooner not repeat. While Lucas was being distracted by the stones, which were clearly some kind of a ruse, once his back was turned, I found myself being raised off the ground by a pair of hairy arms and thrust over this incongruous creature's powerful back. I didn't have time to even think about what was happening to me as I was carried down the mountainous embankment with the ease of a mountain goat. I could hear the creature's heartbeat and his breath rising and falling, and I could smell the powerful woody aroma of pine needles amidst the musty smell of the creature's sweat. As the creature ran with me, he seemed to almost glide at a very fast pace, taking 5-foot strides, and before I knew it, I was back at the farmhouse, and I was so relieved. The creature put me down outside our kitchen door, and my grandmother thrust it open and said, "Oh, there you are! I wondered where on earth you'd got to, and why you were taking so long." And then she stopped dead in her tracks as she saw the creature standing there, larger than life, and I could see her eyes grow round, almost as if she couldn't comprehend what she was actually seeing. This incongruous creature was easily 8 foot tall and between 500 and 600 pounds, was lanky and lean, and covered with long flowing dark brown hair with auburn and blonde highlights. His chest was shaped like a barrel and was dense and solid, built for power and speed. He possessed overlong arms and powerful long legs, and I would describe his appearance to be that of a giant-like man with ape-like influences. I noticed his low-slung, dome-shaped head, seamlessly folded into a large pair of shoulders that was rather like a primate, but the face itself was uncannily human, with deep-set, very dark eyes, a flat nose, and a thin mouth. For a moment time stood perfectly still, as we just stared at each other in a blind stupor. That was soon broken by distant sounds of whistles all over the valley that came from the left to the right. The creature then turned around and glided away and was gone from our sight. "Did you see that?" said my grandmother. I nodded. "Your grandfather was right. The guardians of the forest are indeed real." To cut a long story short, we wasted no time in alerting the police to the roughneck's undesirable presence on our land. He was promptly arrested, while his campsite seemed to be obliterated by all the stones, as they had completely flattened his tent and were all isolated to his camping spot, and some were so heavy they were impossible to pick up manually. It was absolutely amazing he hadn't been killed. Our farm was now teeming with police officers and vehicles everywhere, and they ambled around our property, while my grandmother served them piping hot cups of coffee and tea, along with her hot cinnamon buns fresh from the oven. "You are very lucky to be alive," said the sheriff, mopping his brow that was pouring with sweat. "You are very fortunate indeed that the man did not kill you both. I cannot fathom why he did not." We had told the police officers everything, with the exception of my strange rescue from the outlandish creature. He liked my grandmother, I told the sheriff. The sheriff looked bewildered. "I can't believe you entertained the man, and that he was camped out on your land for so long, eluding the police so successfully. He's an escaped convict, wanted for the grievous murder of 4 people. "Who did he murder, Sheriff?" my grandmother asked, looking mortified. "I knew he was up to no good when I met him, but I just thought he was sleight of hand. It never occurred to me that he could be a killer." "He killed 4 people on a family vacation, just for the hell of it," said the sheriff. "A real nasty piece of work. I gather he had a troubled youth, spending time in and out of juvenile detention facilities, and despite hours of therapy and an assurance from the medical authorities that he was no longer a threat to society, he was finally let out. But what does he do the moment he's out of prison? Murder 4 people. Now that is seriously sick. The only person who could ever speak any common sense to him was his own grandmother, who passed away a very long time ago. His mother believes if she was still alive, none of this ungodly stuff would have ever happened. We're still trying to establish how he managed to escape from the prison this time, but we keep drawing blanks." From what we'd learnt, my grandmother and I were indeed very lucky to be alive. But as for the very strange creature that we encountered, that I now know is called Bigfoot, why had he gone to such superhuman lengths to help us? My grandmother believed she knew the answer to that very strange conundrum. "I think the creature was looking out for us," said my grandmother. "Your grandfather once told me he'd seen a wild man in the woods. He was so excited about the encounter. Such kind eyes, he kept telling me over and over again. I knew your grandfather did not make stories up, but when he spoke about such an outlandish encounter, I thought it was a case of mistaken identity on his part, and that he'd possibly only seen a bear. One day I saw him packing a large cardboard box with food, preserves, bottles of peaches, dried fruits, beans, all that kind of stuff that he'd brought from the grocery store. I asked him who the parcel was for, and he told me the wild men of the forests, because they were hungry. He'd seen their large foot impressions in the snow, and a couple of our chickens had been pilferaged from our coop. Your grandfather put the food parcel outside the woods every single week, and I thought he was completely bonkers, but I let him get on with his mission because it made him very happy. He kept claiming when he picked up the empty box there was always a stone or something in it, which he thought was a gift. I thought at the time he was being ridiculous. So you think the wild men rescued me as a way of saying thank you to my grandfather for helping them out during a difficult winter? That's exactly what I think, said my grandmother. But now that I've seen one for myself, I'm going to carry on his food parcel tradition during the winter months. I stayed with my grandmother 1 more month until my mother came to collect me after her husband's brother finally passed away. But I do look back on that time I spent with her with so much nostalgia and fond memories. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.